Hello, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this will be part 27 in this series, Science of the Symbols. And with the last few episodes, especially be looking at, well, who and what were the alchemists? Now, this is a bit of a contentious argument and discussion point, but the important one, and the one, not the most important, but an important figure to, and the focus here will be Basil Valentine, or Basilius Valentinius, who's credited with publishing Azoth of the Philosopher's Stone. Now, these images are woodcuts, so this was after the printing press really took off, and that's an important point because it's one of the reasons why there's so many of these Hermetic pieces is the printing press. There were these old handwritten and illustrated diagrams, but with Azoth of the Philosopher's Stone and these woodcuts, we get a good standardization as well as good quality text and images coming through. But so yeah, these woodcuts go about to the year 1599, but Basil Valentine, I'll just be calling him, goes back earlier than that. And so let's make a timeline. Okay, what is alchemy? The important question is really to know this is who are the alchemists, who were the alchemists of that time. And well, famously they wrote on the Philosopher's Stone as well as Azoth and Rebis. And so we'll do a timeline and to get an idea of that. So what we have down here is Basil Valentine, said to have been born 1399, but this a monk, a chemist, an alchemist, and basically, at least in the Western European, more sort of modern era, basically the bee's knees when it comes to this topic. And then we have up to now, we have then and now, and this is what my dispute is. Now, I know McKenna is very popular, and some other people comment on it, but okay, so what do we have? Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians, an anonymous document, 1785. Isaac Newton, famous for his alchemy and for his work on the Philosopher's Stone and his descriptions of it, and using these older alchemical descriptions, illustrations, and texts. Okay, and not too long before him, we have people such as Stefan Mikkelsbach have been and Kabbalah, but using him as something of a touchstone. But also at the same period, just before, we have Heinrich Kunrath, which also is other names are attributed to him, but these are all Hermeticists and alchemists. And what are they all interested in? Weights and measure, Hermes, god of weights and measure. The Emerald Tablet, Hermes, god of weights and measure, knowledge of science. These are one of the themes that joins all these alchemists together. Now, shortly before, again this period, De Re Metallica, very important book, George Agricola. A very extensive book because it goes into detail the metallurgical industry. Essentially it's a textbook on minerals, and we have the same symbols being used in this particular one. Now that's important because what were alchemists doing? Well, the Philosopher's Stone and gold. Now gold production, gold manufacture, and gold mining, and on an industrial scale, not on a hokey pokey little scale. We'll not get to that in a moment. So also just before that publication of De Re Metallica, we have Splendor Solis, which is also one of these essential alchemical texts. So back in the 1500s now. Just before that, we have Calum Philosophorum by Paracelsus, some say, or Philip Ulstad. But it's a book which has accurate descriptions. It's a textbook. It's describing the alchemical process, and just like Splendor Solis, it's also a early textbook. And okay, we also have figures such as John Dee, which an important part, but that brings us back to Basil Valentine, and several of the works and famous images attributed to him at least for woodcuts, the illustrations were generally printed around the 1600s. Now, Basil Valentine is an unusual figure in that whether he was a real person or that he's a pen name for many others is an interesting point. So, 1400, we have Basil Valentine basically Rebis, Azoth, and the philosopher's stone in, you could call them standardized texts that would be repeated throughout the centuries to follow by all of the greats of alchemy, the famous alchemists themselves, not the modern description. Now, it's suspected he was a salt manufacturer. Johann Tolder, not sure of the exact pronunciation, but salt manufacture will be very important, which brings us back to the 12 Keys of Basil Valentine. That was, he wrote many books, or is attributed to writing many books, but the 12 Keys and Azoth of the Philosopher's Stone ranks highly. So we have these images, such as this. These two are from the Azoth of the Philosopher's Stone, printed. These versions was printed in 1599, 1600, but accredited to much earlier works of this famous monk, chemist, alchemist. He also have the 12 Keys of Basil Valentine, and again, these are described in many various ways. However, the symbols, the writing, the people that they mixed with, what they were doing, all follows the same key, and this is what I think is very, very unfortunate about the interest in alchemy, in that it tends to be, well, kumbaya stuff, and by that I'm okay. So first, who was Basil Valentine? Figure of some mystery. Many books are attributed to him. It's believed he was a pen name for many other people, especially at that time, 1500s, even early 1600s. You had to be very careful about what you were saying, people getting burned at the stake. But he is, amongst the famed alchemists, he is like a rock star amongst them. So famous works, Azoth of the Philosopher's Stone, 12 Keys of Basil Valentine. But, and this is the important part, he's famous, at least credited for some very important alchemical chemical discoveries: ammonia, sulfuric acid, and hydrochloric acid. Now these, there's quite a good evidence to say it actually goes back at least 1,000 years earlier, to the time of Mary the Jewess, or Cleopatra, the alchemist, who are held in the same respect by the ancient alchemists in comparison to Hermes Trismegistus. That's an important part. So who were the everyone's into the Emerald Tablet, Hermes Trismegistus, but there is quite a body of knowledge and a trail of knowledge which extends way, way back before Basil Valentine. But ammonia, sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, at least he's given credited for it. Now, this is a Mikkelspacher picture, alchemical picture, and what we have is the symbol for sal ammoniac, and ammonia could be, with action of alkali on, the action of alkali on sal ammoniac, or ammonium chloride. Then you can extract ammonia from this, and it's done through using some distillation and capture equipment. That's an important, it's reasonably advanced equipment. Now, sulfuric acid, or oil of vitriol, and we see again vitriol. That's the symbol there for it. Now, the symbols change, vary, but I'm based on these people of this era. He's also famous for hydrochloric acid. Some salt poured into a distillation flask, when concentrated sulfuric acid is, and then concentrated sulfuric acid is added, produces hydrogen chloride gas. This can be hydrochloric acid is essentially what comes from this. And so now salt and sulfuric acid, which brings us back to the alter ego is claimed to be of Basil Valentine, Johann Tolder, salt manufacturer, and also accredited to Basil Valentine is sulfuric acid. So here we see the basics of hydrochloric acid. Now, this is Azoth of the Philosophers, a cover stone. What we have is this triangle here, and this is an important theme. I'll get to it in future episodes, but as a beginning, mercury, salt, and sulfur in these descriptions. Now, that's because what these books is a chemical recipe book. It's a textbook written before modern formal notation. Math notation hadn't been formalized, neither had chemistry notation hadn't been standardized. And these types of texts we can see the standardized texts of the time. Now there are slight variations, which is understandable, but you can, basically, is it this century, or is it Germany, or is it this century and this nation? But the 90% of them stand up throughout this period. Now, what's so important about hydrochloric acid? Well, industry. Everywhere you look, anything that's industrial, where it is touching it now. Glues, dyes, pigment, salt purification being an important aspect, because the salt manufacturers at that time were not just, clumping stones together in the backyard. They had workshops and factories. Metallurgists had workshop and factories. Textiles, and all the chemicals, and as well as the industries themselves, were reasonably advanced. Okay, they're not big factories like now, but they were not hokey little things, and that's an important point. But food, textile, bleach, cleansers, catalyst in all sorts of chemical reactions. That's why it's not just for one thing; it's for so many things. It's one of the tools in the toolkit, and it's one of the better tools in the toolkit is hydrochloric acid. That's why this is so important. That's why this guy is so famed, and that's why his illustrations and writings were continued for later times, even up to the very end of mainstream Rosicrucian writings. They're alchemical texts, they're hermetic texts. They've got to do with science, weights and measures in a dangerous time. So, some other important things. So, Azoth, another repeated reference, or Rebis. So where do these come? Now there are all sorts of descriptions, but if you go to the source materials, what we have there is Azoth and Rebis being described here, and then repeated by the later ones. Now we'll get to that in a moment, but Basil Valentine, Azoth of a Philosopher's Stone, the text, and you can get the text as well. I'm just using the images, but Rebis is very important theme. Now I'm going to critique, so for instance, there's not much around Basil Valentine, but this is a good indicator for what most of it is, at least the modern stuff, say the McKenna stuff. Now, these are some quotes. Now I'll put the link in the video, you can watch the whole video. I'm not cherry picking quotes or taking them out of context. Yes, it has all the illusions of the use of astral salt. I'm going to try to put some of the inflection in there. Here is a dream dragon. Watch the phoenix rise from the ashes of your feces, or something. Okay, so it begins. Now, these are all quotes. Okay, right. Now let's just go. So, for instance, yes, it has all the allusions to the use of astral salt. Here is a green dragon. Watch the phoenix rise from the ashes of your feces, or something. Now, that's my first thing. Now, we're starting off by poisoning the well. It's dismissive of Basil Valentine's legacy, by making the chemical elements, that is, as an interesting side note, and they're just sort of hokey, not to be. The descriptions of a process are given in a dismissive, almost mocking tone. Okay, that would be my first. Now, if you read on further, so it's also fairly literal. For instance, it talks about the different types of vessel used, the specific type of furnace used. It also claims as well that none of these things are particularly expensive. Now it might even be more expensive in the modern age to get modern equipment. I guess you could make your own ceramic furnace of sorts out of just some bunch of bricks in your backyard if you really wanted to, and it would probably be more effective than the kind that was used back in the time when this text was written. Bollocks, absolute bollocks. The vessels and the furnaces used at that time were not primitive, hoped to give it dirt piled up in your backyard, which is as he describes it also as well. Probably not okay, but here it's in the video where it's just probably piled up dirt. Is it literally what he says in the well, this is not even close to the truth. Now, for instance, we can see the old alchemical laboratory drawings. Their furnaces, their equipment was quite sophisticated. This was the basis of it. It was on an industrial scale. It was vital to the machinery of state. It was not just piling up dirt to make poor quality furnaces or poor quality equipment. No, not at all. Currency, jewelry, building of cathedrals, the glass, metalwork, preservation of relics, inks, dyes, all of it. It's the military-industrial complex, you could call it. Alchemists were the were the people of DARPA in their time. So I would strongly disagree with his description that he's not not solitary. It's not the solitary case. You will find this, along the modern lines. I was speaking on alchemy. Now, for instance, this is from the 1600s of basically a catalogue of the glass work that they did to create these. This is called a Mary's bath, for instance, which again relates back to Mary the Jewess and even possibly to Cleopatra the alchemist, 3rd century AD and 3rd century BC. So the vessels, the pot, they were not primitive mounds of dirt used for some little hokey experimental examination around the back of the sheds. The books describe these accurately, and they describe the scale and the industrialization of these elements. And so, back when they would just have mounded up some dirt, put some ashes in, some hot ash and some cinders and so forth, put the kettle on and put a little alcove around it or something. It's all very strange. It's funny to think about them performing these chemical feats back when they were just dirt roads everywhere and people largely shit outdoors. Again, poisoning the world, because this primitive image of these pissy tools and done on a small scale is just not at all accurate to the alchemists of the time. And also I think it does a disservice because it puts the actual alchemy, the chemistry of them, into some they did a little bit of chemistry on the side, sort of, but here's my kumbaya occult reading on it. Well, no, it's not a little bit wrong. It's very, very wrong. It was an industrial scale. It was high quality equipment and actually producing high quality goods. That can be seen again in the productions of the great cathedrals, for instance, and all the aspects that go with these things. So it's just not even like, especially with just mounded up some dirt and that their furnaces were poor quality. No, not even close. So Basil Valentine, Azoth of a Philosopher's Stone. So this is where most of the modern readings of it come from, and to be frank, they're completely missing the mark, and they're turning it into new agey stuff. Now Mercury, Azoth, just as just look at. Okay, I'll do that in the next few videos, but we're looking at why is Mercury Azoth, the first principle, and we'll do some of those in the future, but also the concept of Rebis. So Basil Valentine, the Azoth of philosophers. Now this is pretty much the iconic image in regards to Rebis. This is Michael Foster, professor of physiology, and he wrote about the rise of chemical physiology. You can pause to read this, but just some of the main features to come off it. So again, hydrochloric acid, oil of vitriol, sulfuric acid, and also about Basil Valentine taking alchemy to the next level, and especially rethinking the older ideas of the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And that comes back to sulfur, mercury, and salt. So sulfur, that which is combustible, which is changed or destroyed, or which at all events disappears during burning and combustion. The element sulfur. Okay, mercury, that which temporarily disappears during burning or combustion, which is dissociated with burning from the body burnt, which may be recovered. That is to say, that which is volatile. And salt, that which is fixed, the residue or ash, which something remains after burning. Now there are different types of salt, but this concept of defining sulfur, mercury, and salt, very important, hugely influential, massive step forward. It's in terms of chemistry, it was almost like what Newton was doing. Which brings us back to this concept of Rebis, which is something that Basil Valentine talks about, and basically all readings of Rebis after can be at least traced back to this fellow, but he's not the source, and we'll go to those in future episodes. But at least in the Western European sort of modern sense, he's a choke point from which all these other hermeticists and alchemists come back to, and that's what makes him so important. Now we get to this concept of rebus, so the union of the male and the female. So you see all medieval images, even Leonardo da Vinci. And what else did da Vinci do? He was into anatomy. He was into physics. He was a scientist, and that's one of the things that unites all these guys. Johann Faust, okay, for instance, Rebis Hermaphroditus. Hermaphroditus was the child of Hermes, Mercury, and Aphrodite, Venus. That's worth considering because these actually have ancient origins, because Cleopatra, the alchemist, 3rd century BC, through to Mary, the Jewess, 3rd century AD, you're spanning the Roman, Greco-Roman period, and which found a lot of their knowledge from Egypt. Cleopatra, the alchemist, was Egyptian, and even the word had various roots of it. So is that famous by attributed to Valentine, okay, Rebis, but also this is a famous one by Heinrich Kunrath, and we also have Sol and Coagula, but also Rebis, Azoth as well, Rebis and Azoth, and the alchemical wedding, the male and the sun, and the sun and the moon, silver and gold, the male and the female. Sun, male, silver, gold, the female, Rebis. There's the close-up of it. So we have Azoth of a philosopher's stone accredited to Basil Valentine and Heinrich Kunrath, and we see Rebis. And even it's important to note how this Mercury separates Rebis as well. Separation is another theme. We'll become to those in future episodes. But we have Rebis. We also have Azoth as these common themes. Now, what is Rebis? Now all the sources for these will inevitably come back to Basil Valentine again. And so Rebis, from the Latin dual matter, double matter, and it's the end product of the great work or magnum opus of the alchemist. Now, having gone through the stages of putrefaction and purification, so recent uploads, yeah, okay, you got that in there. Okay, opposing qualities are separated. Once more, these qualities are united into the divine hermaphrodite, a reconciliation of spirit and matter, both male and females in a single body, the sun and moon as the male and female halves, just as the red king and the white queen are similarly associated. So these are what you will find a standard definition. Now, are they speaking of a spiritual, metaphysical sense? Well, probably, yes. Okay, there's some element in there. But what was the source of this? From where did they define, where was this found? Well, it was found in the chemistry, by observing nature, just like Plato and Pythagoras used geometry and math to create a philosophy based on nature. So were the alchemists. They were studying chemistry, and they were seeing that there were certain rules, divine rules, that were followed. And from these naturally occurring did the philosophy emerge. But the point of it, the important point is, and that's what's missed so often amongst hermeticists and alchemist discussions, is the origins of it. And so, for instance, the red queen and the white queen, and putrefaction, which is one of the 7 steps of alchemy. For instance, there's like this Mikkelspacher picture I was showing before. Okay, we have 7 steps, like putrefaction being one of them. Solve and coagula as well. Okay, enough of that guy. Okay, solve and coagula, but also putrefaction being this important part in the process of rebus. And the red and the white queen. Now we'll get to that in the next episodes. We'll be coming back to this, but what do we have? This a common description: the black, the white, and the red. The white queen and the red queen, and putrefaction, the marriage. This is essentially, this is the mercury element, the mercury, the form, the method of, anyway, we'll get to that more, but the red queen and the white queen, so the white rose and the red rose, this is what they are publicizing. So Basil Valentine, Basilius Valentinius is also referred to. For instance, secret symbols of a Rosicrucian is often mentioned, and you'll find him mentioned throughout all of these. He's pretty much the guy. And so what we have is Basil Valentine back here, and we have the modern descriptions up here. And when you look into their works, what who they influenced, and who those influences were influencing, and who they were influenced by, what we have is, well, the Ray Metallica being the, it's industrial scale science, magic. This was magic at the time, and that's why even the word magic, like the magi and magic, now it's come to mean different things up in this scale. But when we go back to these guys, well, it's different. And they were magicians. They could do the impossible. And also they wrote in a different way, and there was a mysticism attached to them. But at their heart, what were they all? They were all hermeticists, in that they were interested in cartography, construction, street planning. So survey, weights and measures was essential to them. Coinage, weights and measures. How do you do alchemy without weights and measures? Well, you just can't. It's an essential element for it. And these guys were, industrial scientists of their time, and the books were highly valuable. So now maps are freely available. Back then, maps was like high technology, not high technology, secret, top secret stuff, because empires could, the better your map, the better you could arrange your empire. And that's what's happened. And so if we look at the then and compare it to the now, it's apples and oranges. I'm sorry, it just, now maybe Terence, maybe he's published a lot, but the more I look, the less I see, because it's what it was then and what it was now. Now, not saying there was no mystical aspect back in this time, but by the descriptions of this time, you'll find that the actual foundation stones of what they're doing have disappeared. They're not being talked about, and that is my problem with this, sort of. It's not just about this easy, take some hallucinogens, you'll find enlightenment. I have issue with that, but it's not just a philosophical issue, and I don't got nothing against substances. I'm a fan, let's just say, myself, but no, compared to what it was and to how it is being described now, or more accurately, how it is not being described now, it's chalk and cheese, apples and oranges. That you can't. It's just almost impossible to reconcile them. How do they do not key together anymore? And that is why I think why these have gone away from what I usually do. And just to explain this, and we'll get to more of it, because it's rock solid, this evidence. It's written down, but you just won't see it here. You won't see it up on this end. Now, I'm not. I didn't discover this. Other people did, and I'm just following through with it. But what I mean is that these, and I don't consider myself an alchemical expert, but but with what little I do know, I know that these guys are not hermetic or alchemical experts in the least. And we've had lot more to come on this, because you just got to put the pieces together, and well, a lot of the pieces fall apart. Have a good one.